Hi, I'm Claire Cass-Stevens. I'm a graduate student at the University of Virginia in their Master of Landscape Architecture program. But this summer, I was lucky enough to work at Monticello as their GIS intern. And while I was there, I was specifically working on this project called Documenting and Sharing Monticello's Landscape History, which is a 3-year project to effectively renew and finesse the management of all the horticultural records at Monticello. So, as you all probably know, Monticello is the mountaintop home of Thomas Jefferson, and it's well known for the house, which reflects Jefferson's adventures in architecture, but it's also well known for its gardens and its landscape. So we've got a winding walk with ornamental gardens, as well as a 1,000-foot-long vegetable garden. But the mountaintop as a whole is a designed landscape. So throughout, let's see, we've got, I don't know if you can see this or not, but there are 2 orchards. There's a grove that had what Jefferson called his pet trees. He loved his trees. There is a vineyard and alleys, Mulberry Row, and around the roundabouts all over the property. And so there are decades worth of records about this entire landscape and its management. And so what we've been trying to do, that's the grove, and that's Mulberry Row. And what we've been trying to do is reorganize all of this and build it up. So these are some of the old versions of the database on these slides, on these note cards here, and which are pretty great. But what I was doing this summer was adding spatial information. So you can kind of see, they used to try and do it like this with little X's on note cards. But what I was able to do was go out with a GPS and start to mark the points of trees all over the grounds. And to do that, well, to reorganize all of our records, we started using IRIS-BG, which is a fairly new collections management database that I don't know if anybody here has started using it as well, but it's geared toward botanic gardens, but it's very flexible because we have horticultural information, but also information about cultural history that we're trying to tie in. Plants are essential to the historic narrative of this site, so it's important to unite these 2 things. And so I'll walk you through IRIS a little bit as I go through the process we took to map and update all of our records. This is kind of what you see when you open it up. It's one component, which is the taxa. And so here, this lists all the species of plants that we might find. You know, it's kind of a general database. And so this reflects all the old records we have. So I loaded the existing records into IRIS like this. And this kind of becomes the pool that we can pull from as we build a database of specific plants. And let's see. So within the taxa, you have this sheet. So if I were to click on one of these, click there, it takes us here to this, this page where you can enter more specific information about the species. So you can put, family, genus, species, common names down here, any other of this information that you want. If it's a hybrid of some kind, you can put that. More details. So there are all these tabs along the top that have fields where you can enter information. Parentage. There's one for images, so you can put images into this database, and references. So for us, this is really useful because we're pulling from historic records, so including letters, including books that mention a specific kind of plant that Jefferson had. We can log all of that here. And if I go back over here on the right-hand side, you can see attributes, and that's where you can put custom fields. So we were using this for things like the first time that a plant was mentioned by Jefferson, or the first time it was mentioned in sources about American history. So this was my daily life, was going out into the field and mapping. So that from logging all of the kind of general species, general information that we had about what was out there, I then took the Trimble, which is our GPS device, and took it out into the field and walked from tree to tree, getting the coordinates. And the kind of kit of parts we had was the Trimble, the GPS. It had a thing called a rangefinder on it that had a sensor that could measure the width of trees, the height of trees, which was really useful. We did do some of those measurements. We did it both ways of using the Trimble and also taking a huge tape out there. And with a partner, I have another intern, Meg, went out with me and would stand at one side of the tree and I'd stand on the other, and we tried to kind of estimate the canopy width. We had the Zephyr 2, which is an antenna, and all this was connected on a fiber range pole that I would walk around with. This was the area that I worked on, so going from the house down to the woodland edge is pretty vast. And let's see. This was the general workflow that I followed. So out in the field with the Trimble, we used a program called TerraSync, which looks like this when you open up the Trimble or open it up on the Trimble. And we'd press one of these things, we'd use point generic, enter the species name of the tree. So I got really good at identifying trees this summer. And then this was the old map that we had, and I was able to use this out in the field to kind of help the identification. Here I am with Peggy, curator of plants, on one of my first days out there mapping a white mulberry, I think. And that's me and Meg. And so over time, we're out there spending all of our days. And after we've collected all these points, we go back to the office and start to import them. So for this, we used Pathfinder Office, and we had the help of our friends in archaeology with this. And we imported these points, and as we did it, you could start to read the landscape of Monticello, which was a really kind of magical thing. So here we are, building it up. Got the vines in there of the grapes down, and you can see all those examples of planted form that I mentioned. So the alleys here, and the orchard here, and these vines here. So that was very exciting. And part of this was solving mysteries too. So like I said, our records we have extensive records. Some of them have some of them aren't accurate anymore. And so for this map, this is the South Orchard. A lot of these points on the map, which was made last year, have question marks. And so part of my job was trying to figure out, well, what is this tree now? And a lot of that had to do with tasting fruit and photographing plants and taking them back to the office and consulting with other people on what they might be. And so once we imported all those points into GIS, the next step was to get the points from there into IRIS. And IRIS is part of the reason we are using it, and it's great for Botanical Gardens, is that it has fields for coordinates. So it's kind of engineered for spatial records and representing what you have on a map and not just, in lists. So to do that, this is when we ran into our first big challenge, which was that we were mapping in state plane, which is one coordinate system, but IRIS-BG needs to use another coordinate system. So I kind of sat there for a week trying to figure this out, and it turned into a great opportunity because we contacted Harvard, and they who was the developer for IRIS-BG, and also contacted people in other botanic gardens and other historic sites who are using this system and who've been through this. So it was sort of a nice way to network, even though it was a challenge. It ended up being that there's a really simple way to do this in GIS that actually all of you GIS experts probably know about already. But what I ended up doing was writing this very detailed instruction manual for people in the future. And so we exported all those points as a list from GIS once the coordinates had been fixed, and then put them into this format here. So these fields are defined by IRIS-BG, and it's setting up the data for data import, which is a module you can add on to IRIS-BG. And it's very simple, it's very straightforward once you set up your spreadsheet correctly. So here, things we were entering to get started were the year, item year is the year that we mapped the plant, item type, planting, the coordinates, and then that's kind of where we started for this. Item number and accession number, those are things that we had to set up in IRIS beforehand. So every species would have an accession number, and then you would match it up in your spreadsheet. And we would bring it into IRIS and get this very long list of plants that we had mapped. And let's see. To go into individual records, you can click on one of these and go in, and every species, like I said, has an accession number, but then within that accession number are many items. So these are the individual plants. And so here, this is redbud, and it shows all the individual plants we have, and you can click on one of those, and over here on the right side, you can start to add specific information. So IRIS is interesting because you have the taxa, which is just general information about each species, but then you have accessions, and that is kind of building upon that baseline. So here, if this particular plant was, I don't know, planted on a certain day that we knew, we could put that, but it would also link to the taxa information that says, oh, Jefferson first planted this tree generally in this year. So it's a good way of linking kind of general information with specific, plant-specific information. You also have, you can put images of the specific plant here, references about the specific plant. So here is the map that IRIS-BG makes. It has an option to create a map from all your points, and it uses, like here it's using the Bing satellite map, but you can choose different backgrounds for it. You can even import your own. And if you hover over any of the points, it'll show information. So here it's showing a Tilia americana. It's showing its accession number and its item number. So you could click on that and it'll take you to the record. So you can kind of go back and forth between moving or working in lists and working on this map. But we weren't, part of the point of this project is to make the landscape more publicly accessible, because I know from working on the mountaintop myself, I got asked questions every day about what's this plant, what's this tree, is this one original? And so what this is doing is setting up what will become a public interface. And IRIS-BG is linked to this Garden Explorer that I thought I would show you quickly. We don't have one set up yet, but we're setting the foundation for that. And so it's an interactive system, and you can go to the map, so you'll see it looks just like the map that we had in IRIS, and you can start to zoom in, and you see all these plant points coming up, maybe. Well, the idea is that you can click on one of those points and it will show you all the information that you have in IRIS. So it'll show you what, and you can customize what is public and what's not, but you could include information about the kind of plant, where it grows best, but you could also have information about why Jefferson was interested in this one, what it was used for. You can have photographs. So it's a great way of making these collections public. Now, there are a couple things we didn't do that would have been really helpful to do that we didn't either know about or we found out about kind of too late in the process. So I thought I'd mention those in case you're thinking about using IRIS. The first is IRIS BG Mobile. So we were using the Trimble and going out and kind of doing this all very manually. But there is an application on the Trimble or on your iPhone, on your iPad, that allows you to go out and kind of get into IRIS BG in the field. So rather than using this other program and then moving it all into IRIS BG, you're just working straight into the application. And then you plug it into the computer and it syncs it all for you. So you don't have to go through that kind of convoluted system of Pathfinder to Excel and all this stuff. But one issue with that was that with the Trimble and TerraSync, I was able to stand by this tree for however long I wanted. Maybe it was 30 seconds, maybe it was 2 minutes. It kind of depended on how well we were getting satellite signals. With this program, IRIS BG Mobile, you kind of press the button and it took a record pretty fast. So we felt like maybe TerraSync was giving more accurate readings of where plants were. And it was pretty amazing that the difference between standing there for 10 seconds and 2 minutes was that this tree was suddenly, 10 feet away if you were just standing there for a minute. But as you spend more time, it kind of hones in. Another thing is that there's a really great new synchronization tool that works with ArcMap and IRIS. So you can essentially plug IRIS BG, your database, into GIS, and it will show you all of your points, all your tree points or whatever you're mapping. And so instead of having to, again, do it all manually, it kind of automatically updates for you. A third thing that I don't have an image of here is called a data dictionary. So if you are thinking of doing this and you want to use TerraSync to get the more accurate reading, there's a thing you can set up that draws from your IRIS taxa list, so all the species that you're going to find out there, and it creates a dictionary of these, and it makes it a lot faster to map. And when I was out there, I was typing in every name individually every time. And this kind of lets you choose from a drawdown list. And what it also does is set up the interface so that you can add fields, custom fields, in addition to the species or the plant name. So you could say, I want to measure, while I'm out there, I want to map the point, I want to name the species, I want to measure DBH, diameter breast height, I want to measure the tree height. So you can kind of, instead of starting with just the points and then going back out in the field and getting this more kind of fine-grained information, you can do it all at once. And that's another thing we didn't work with. And so the one thing about IRIS is that it's great that it has the mapping component, but it's not necessarily the most beautiful looking thing. So we also used GIS, Hook GIS, and IRIS up together to create these kinds of maps that represent not just points, but masses of trees. So you can get a sense of maybe how the landscape feels from above. And so one last thing I want to say is that this project, I think, is especially relevant at Monticello because Jefferson loved his trees. He kept meticulous records of all the plants that grew on the grounds. And so there's kind of this conservation ethic that carries through from his time to now. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and keep working with it because it helps save and preserve these landscapes. So, thanks.
I was wondering if, and I realize this is sort of the first section, so I don't know if this is another step, but
Yeah.
is there a way that you can sort of map, I guess, you know, where the trees are all part of one LA or something like different forms, and sort of how would that look, and is that part of the longer term project?
You can't necessarily group them. What you can do is set up locations, which is one thing we did. So maybe, like for us, we have Mulberry Row as a location, and all the trees in Mulberry Row are labeled as being there. And so if I map just Mulberry Row, the location, it'll show those alone. But if you wanted to, there's no way to create a record that, well, actually that's not true. You could, there are ways to do it, I guess, but it's not elegant necessarily, and it's not going to match the logic of Iris, maybe. That is something I could imagine happening maybe after the fact if you're kind of making these finessed maps and you want to like turn on and off a set of plants, then you would have to make, I'm not sure, but yeah, I guess the answer is yes, but it's not super easy. Yeah.
With the Irish, sorry. First time seeing it, does it come preloaded with plants?
Yes, actually. It sort of does. So you enter, it knows the right family to pair with the genus and species. So, and it has genus names loaded in, but you have to tell it what you want to actually have in your database. So it's smart. It knows what the plants are, but you have to, at least start typing them in, and then it kind of fills in the rest for you.
It updates to the current development.
Yeah.
Names that, like asters that have changed to different genus names.
Actually, and that was a funny thing of entering these was that some of the names we had in our old records were old names. And so some of that was, trying to get in. I couldn't find the plant, and then I realized changed name.
So it's a fitting picture here for the question I have of an old orchard, the orchard at Monticello. When I was at Yosemite, I did an orchard management plan for the Homestead era orchards at Yosemite. And a big question was, what are these cultivated varieties of trees that we have? How do we determine that? There's thousands, and they're often not commercially available, and it takes a real expert to be able to visually distinguish these cultivated varieties. But this is something that you may want to look into. There's the U.S. Forest Service has an agricultural research group, ARS, Agricultural Research Service. They maintain a database of all the genotypes of like thousands of cultivated varieties of old fruit trees.
Yeah.
You can send them a sample, and they can test it against that database and get back to you as to what it is based on its genetic makeup.
Yeah.
And to really nail down what those cultivated varieties are, that's about the only way I think you can really tell.
Yeah.
So, but it's really useful information that becomes very interpretive. The interpretive value of that and public interest in that is really high. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much.